Balder once again dreamed of his death. And as Balder traversed the land, his horse stumbled, twisted its foot, and limped back, bleeding. This was seen as an omen of impending doom. The Asgardians held a long council and decided to do everything in their power to protect the purest and most noble god. The suspicious Höd, particularly concerned for Balder's well-being, suggested that all beings and things should swear not to harm Balder. Frigg took these oaths from everything and everyone. To spare Balder, fire and water, iron and all kinds of ore, stones and earth, trees, bushes and woods, wild and tame four-legged animals, birds, diseases and poisons, and malicious snakes all pledged their word. Separate oaths were demanded from all swords, axes, hammers, and spears. Even the weapons of the Asgardians willingly took the oath. After all this was done and announced, the gods tested the oaths for their firmness. First, they threw small stones, then rootstocks, then boulders, and finally spears at Balder. Balder remained unharmed. The Asgardians then passed their time by placing Balder in the middle of the Thing place and trying to stab and strike him. Odin threw his spear, Gungnir, which missed its mark, first tentatively, but then with force, burying itself in the ground at Balder's feet. Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, which never missed its target, always returned to Thor's hand without causing even a scratch on Balder. These tests soon turned into celebrations, accompanied by plenty of mead, and Odin began to believe in Balder's invulnerability. Thor had little regard for the prophecies of the Norns and Balder's dreams. The oath of the Asgardians was now considered irrevocable. Balder was invulnerable. His aura became even brighter, and Balder enjoyed this esteem. Loki deeply resented the Asgardians' self-satisfied nature. Like a consuming fire, he taught constancy. Perhaps out of envy or malice, he took the form of an old woman and went to Frigg in her hall, Fensalir. The transformed Loki feigned concern and asked whether Balder was truly immune to all attacks. Frigg assured him that even the frosty giants and the fierce mountain giants had sworn not to harm Balder. Thor's hammer Mjolnir, never missing its target, always returned to Thor's hand without inflicting even a scratch on Balder. These tests soon evolved into festivities, marked by plenty of mead, and Odin began to believe in Balder's invulnerability. Thor had little faith in the prophecies of the Norns and Balder's dreams. The oath of the Asgardians was now deemed unbreakable. Balder was invulnerable. His radiance only grew brighter, and Balder reveled in this esteem. Loki deeply detested the Asgardians' complacent demeanor. Like a devouring fire, he taught steadfastness. Perhaps out of envy or spite, he assumed the form of an old woman and went to Frigg in her hall, Fensalir. The disguised Loki feigned concern, questioning whether Balder was truly impervious to all attacks. Frigg affirmed that even the icy giants and the fierce mountain giants had vowed not to harm Balder. "So you have taken oaths from all beings and things?" inquired Loki, disguised as an old woman to Frigg. "I even extracted an oath from the sharpest blade, and never has a god died," Frigg replied. The old woman, deeply bowed as if bearing the weight of worlds, further questioned, "If I knew whom you overlooked, I could protect Balder." Frigg pondered, and then remembered. West of Valhall grows a mistletoe. It was too young to demand an oath from. The old woman departed and transformed back into Loki. He fetched the mistletoe and hurried to the Thing place. There, two Asgardians shot at Balder simultaneously. Tyr hurled his spear, and Thor threw his hammer Mjolnir. Balder laughed brightly, befitting a god of light, and once again, mead was generously poured into the drinking horns. The carefreeness of the Golden Age seemed to have returned. Thor held a drinking horn in each hand, and everyone, including Odin, laughed with relief that the danger seemed averted. Only Heimdall objected to these tests, but he could not prevail in the council of the Asgardians, and stood defiantly next to the Asgardian bridge, Bifrost. Gold-encrusted shields gleamed at the thing place, silver-adorned weapons sparkled in the sun, and some Asinjur wore purple robes. Even the typically cautious goddesses lost their fears and proudly displayed their jewelry adorned with semi-precious stones. Women shrieked with pleasure and a longing for masculinity. Loki watched with a fixed gaze the rejoicing and furious tumult. How quickly the Asgardians had forgotten the danger. Even Odin seemed to trust the oaths. Perhaps Loki envied Balder the most, as his invulnerability had become as familiar to him as the light of the sun. Loki approached Hod, who stood apart from the circle formed by the men around Balder, and asked him, "Why don't you shoot at Balder?" "I cannot see where Balder stands, and I have no weapon," the blind god replied. "I will show you where he is," retorted Loki, handing him the mistletoe. "Take this twig and shoot." Hod grasped the twig, feeling its thin and trembling form. Hod's knees also began to tremble as he recalled the prophecy of the Völva and the shaky reed shaft that Starkhand had shot at King Vika. "Throw it like the other men," urged Loki. As Hod hesitated, Loki whispered to him, "Some Asgardians are watching and wondering why you do not honor Balder." Hod asked again, just to be sure, "Was there no object forgotten in the oath-taking?" "Even Mjolnir and the poison arrows of the giants could not harm Balder," Loki replied. Hod, who rarely had the opportunity to gain recognition, gathered all his strength, which he had saved up over the years, and threw the twig in the direction Loki pointed. Balder fell to the ground, pierced by the twig. The Asgardians, except for Odin, initially cried out in delight, thinking Balder was just playing along and letting himself fall to the ground, pretending to be dead. But Odin, the father of the gods, immediately understood the gravity of the situation. Had he, the wise one-eyed, lost sight of Hod for even a moment? Had he overlooked the mistletoe? Hod, not knowing how close Balder had really been to him, was deeply shocked when the cheering suddenly fell silent. The Asgardians also fell silent, speechless with horror as they saw the blood flowing from Balder's chest. When the gods realized that Balder was indeed dead, they could not utter a word of sorrow. Their horror was too great. Even the hands that had risen to lift Balder fell limply. The Asgardians looked at each other, with only one thought in their minds: revenge for this deed. Yet, the peace at the Thing Place was sacred and inviolable. When the Asgardians finally tried to speak, tears mingled with their words. Odin was the most distraught, for no one understood better than he the significance of Balder's death for the Asgardians and the existence of the world. It was the worst calamity that had ever befallen gods and men. Nanna, Balder's wife, bent over in pain and collapsed onto a stone. Loki, too, stood motionless. When confronted, he insisted that he had only intended to test Balder, to bring back caution and prudence. "How could a slender, trembling twig kill a god?" he asked. But no Asgardian believed Loki. He was now seen as the instigator of Balder's murder. The Asgardians brought Balder's body to the seashore, to lay him to rest in his ship Ringhorn, named for its ring-shaped horn, a symbol of the sun. But try as they might to push against the planks, the ship would not budge an inch. Consequently, the strong giantess Hyrrokin from the Jotun race was summoned. She arrived promptly to help, riding on a wolf, holding it with serpents as reins. Odin tasked Serka with holding the beast, which they managed only by wrestling it to the ground. Hyrrokin approached the ship and with a single heave pushed it into the water, sending sparks flying and causing the shore to tremble. Thor, viewing the tremors and noise as a desecration, angrily reached for his hammer and threatened to smash the giantess's skull. However, the other gods reassured him of her good intentions, pleaded for peace on her behalf, and eventually calmed Thor. Balder's body was laid on the ship and placed on a pyre. Nanna, unable to bear separation from her beloved husband, died of grief, her heart breaking. She too was carried onto the ship and laid beside Balder. The Asgardians then ignited the fire, commencing their final voyage. Thor stood next to the ship, lifted Mjolnir, and consecrated the pyre. Suddenly, a dwarf ran between his feet. Thor, thinking the dwarf was disturbing the sacred funeral, kicked him into the fire, where he burned. Many beings came to Balder's grand funeral to pay their last respects. Odin arrived first, not on Sleipnir, but accompanied by the Valkyries and his ravens, alongside his wife Frigg. Freyr drove up in his chariot, pulled by Gullimbursti, the boar with golden bristlets. Heimdall rode on his horse Goldtop, and Freyja arrived in her chariot drawn by cats. The other Asgardians also appeared for the burial. Loki and Hod, fearing retribution, hid themselves. Despite their ongoing conflict with the gods, even the most malevolent giants had never attempted to harm Balder. Numerous mountain giants and fierce frost giants gathered around the pyre. Many dwarves stood in the ranks. The skillful smiths, the elves, long-standing friends of gods and humans, were also present. Odin approached the pyre and whispered something into his son's ear. What he said is known only to Balder and himself. Perhaps he promised vengeance for Balder's death, or affirmed that Balder would return as an innocent. Odin then placed the ring, Draupnir and Balder's horse, complete with its precious harness, onto the pyre.